Welcome to Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Coy in Singapore. The headlines. All eyes on China's President Xi Jinping as he wraps up the National People's Congress and gets set for his second term at the top. Homes destroyed, cattle killed, and thousands of acres of land devastated by wildfires in southwest Australia.
I'm Sharon Jicklale in London. Also on the programme, Uber suspends testing its driverless cars after an American woman is run down and killed. And 8 years on, has a statue of the Virgin Mary stopped God-fearing locals in the Philippines from destroying their coral reefs?
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London, and 9 a.m. in Beijing, where China's President Xi Jinping will be delivering a speech to close the annual session of the National People's Congress shortly. It's been a significant Congress with the presidential term limits being lifted, in effect making Xi Jinping president for life, should he choose to be. Well, joining us live from Beijing is Stephen McDonald. Stephen, President Xi is expected to start speaking very shortly.
Absolutely. He'll be getting up here at the Great Hall of the People behind me and closing off this truly historic Congress, one which has gotten rid of the two-term limit, enabling him to stay on for president for as long as he chooses. Now, soon after he speaks, there'll be the once-a-year press conference from China's #2 leader, Premier Li Keqiang, and it'll be interesting to see if Li Keqiang gets asked about the extension of the presidential term limits and concerns that this is putting too much power in the hands of one person. You know, it's interesting, Xi Jinping could have stayed on in power effectively as the head of the military and also as the chairman of the Communist Party, but he obviously wants this title of president as well, or they wouldn't have bothered to make this change. Now, it means, of course, that he is going to be around for some time, I'd imagine, and so people had better get used to hearing him and seeing him as the leader here in China.
As you say, that news got a lot of attention, but of course there have been many other major announcements as well.
Yes, well, we could see questions at the press conference, for example, about the new anti-corruption body which has been set up here at the Congress. Now, one of the reasons Xi Jinping has so much power is because of the widespread anti-corruption crackdown within the Communist Party. 1.5 million people have been punished, and he's made a lot of enemies, making it very difficult for him to step down, in fact. Now there's a new body extending this corruption drive into the general public. We could see questions about that today. Also, we've seen the appointment of a new head of People's Bank of China, that's the Reserve Bank here. We've seen Xi Jinping's name and his philosophy placed in the country's constitution. It has been a very big conference, but really everything else has been swamped by is the power that Xi Jinping has been able to draw around himself in various ways, and I think it's hard for anything else to cut through, and that's going on here.
Stephen McDonald in Beijing, thank you for the update, and of course we'll have more on that live speech shortly.
In the meantime, let's take a look at some of the day's other news. Uber has suspended all tests of self-driving cars, and that's after a woman in Arizona was killed in a collision. Now, at the time of the accident, the vehicle was running in autonomous mode with an operator at the wheel. Now, Uber described what happened as incredibly sad and said it was fully cooperating with local authorities. Our technology correspondent Dave Lee reports from San Francisco.
It was late Sunday night when, according to police, Elaine Hertzberg was struck by Uber's self-driving car. The 49-year-old was crossing the road but not using the pedestrian zone. There was a driver behind the wheel, but Uber said the vehicle was in full autonomous mode, meaning it was handling all aspects of the driving. Miss Hertzberg was taken to hospital but died from her injuries. Taking to Twitter, Uber's chief executive, Dara Khosrowshahi, said the news from Arizona was incredibly sad, adding, "We're thinking of the victim's family as we work with local law enforcement to understand what happened." As part of its licensing agreement, Uber must keep detailed logs in case of an incident like this. Although Ms. Hertzberg is the first pedestrian to be killed by an autonomous vehicle, her death comes a year after Uber temporarily took its self-driving cars off the road, following an accident that left a Volvo SUV on its side in Arizona. The program was later reinstated.
There are so many motor vehicle deaths in the United States and generally every year. And the ultimate goal of self-driving cars is to eliminate those entirely. But these are complex systems that are just sort of starting to navigate the roads.
Arizona has positioned itself as a testing ground for this new technology. But incidents like this will no doubt concern those who do not believe these systems are yet safe enough to be on our roads. Dave Lee, BBC News, San Francisco.
Also making news today, Britain and the European Union say they've agreed the terms of a transitional period after Brexit. The deal covers citizenship and financing the divorce, but there still remains the sticking point of how to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, which is far from resolved. The BBC's Damien Grammaticus explains.
In the withdrawal agreement will be the EU's preferred option that Northern Ireland, part of the UK, remains still under the EU's rules, regulations, customs zone as well, the customs union, if a better solution can't be found. Now, the UK still doesn't view that as the preferred option. That still has to be sorted out in the negotiations, how that would work, and that is the big stumbling block.
A Ukrainian military pilot blamed by Russia for the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 has reportedly taken his own life. Vladislav Voloshin has always denied Russian allegations that he was behind the tragedy. Dutch investigators concluded that a Russian missile destroyed the jet, killing 298 people in 2014. The police investigating a series of bombings in the US state of Texas say they have no clear idea what motivated the attacks and they have no suspects. 4 devices have exploded in the city of Austin this month. 2 African-American men were killed in the initial attacks, and a 3rd device wounded an elderly Hispanic woman. Now, Australian actor Margot Robbie has taken time out of a publicity tour for the Peter Rabbit film to get close to another small furry animal. We'll meet the quokka. That's right, it's about the size of a cat. It's been described as really one of the happiest animals on the planet. Now, they are only found in Western Australia, and they've brought a big boost in tourism, with people flocking there in search of the perfect selfie with that cute little animal.
Now, an international team of chemical weapons experts has arrived in Salisbury to examine the nerve agent used to poison the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. The BBC understands British investigators have broadened their search to include a car that Yulia is believed to have travelled in, as our diplomatic correspondent James Landell reports.
The focus today shifted to the village of Durrington, 10 miles north of Salisbury, where investigators removed a car that was used to pick up Yulia Skripal from the airport the day before she and her father Sergei were attacked with nerve agent. Nearby, at the military research complex at Porton Down, inspectors from the Global Chemical Weapons Watchdog PCW were due to start analysing the nerve agent that British experts believe came from Russia. In Brussels, the Foreign Secretary arrived to brief EU counterparts, saying Russian denials were increasingly absurd.
This is a classic Russian strategy of trying to conceal the needle of truth in a haystack of lies and obfuscation. There is scarcely a country round the table here in Brussels that has not been affected in recent years by some kind of malign or disruptive Russian behaviour.
EU foreign ministers issued a statement expressing their unqualified solidarity with the UK and taking its assessment that Russia was to blame extremely seriously. The EU and NATO speaking as one.
What is absolutely clear is our full solidarity with the United Kingdom and our extreme concern about what has happened. That is really unacceptable.
All 29 NATO allies stand united. We stand in solidarity with the United Kingdom, and the UK is not alone.
But in Moscow, as President Putin began his fourth term, the defiance continued, his foreign ministry dismissing the EU statement as an anti-Russian reflex. As for Russia's diplomats in London, well, some of these officials and their families will be heading home tomorrow, 23 in all, with a similar number of British diplomats leaving Moscow shortly.
Tomorrow, the National Security Council will meet to decide Britain's next steps, and there's a live debate within government. Should they retaliate and escalate, or simply do nothing? Should they kick yet more Russian diplomats out of the embassy here, or should they find new ways of penalising Russia?
The risk for Britain is that a bilateral confrontation with Russia might overshadow attempts to maintain international pressure. Back in Salisbury, the police tonight revealed the full scale of the investigation, with 250 counter-terrorism officers examining 4,000 hours of CCTV, 800 exhibits and 400 witness statements. Detectives said this could last many months. James Landale, BBC News.
Now, residents in parts of Australia hit by bushfires have been told it's still not safe to return home after more than 70 properties were destroyed. Officials say the fires in New South Wales and neighbouring Victoria are now being brought under control, but hundreds of cattle have been killed and over 100,000 acres of land burnt. I asked George Karyanopoulos, who analysed previous bushfire disasters in Australia, if they were becoming worse due to climate change, as some experts suggest.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in Australia at the moment is a fairly typical summer pattern. We'll often see large fires in the southeast of the country, and in the tropical north we'll often see cyclones and flooding events. So overall I think it is a fairly typical pattern, although we are seeing these events happen very frequently, particularly in those summer months and across the usual window that we see during that time.
And is there anything particularly different about this one from previous ones that you've studied?
Yeah, look, this event is really interesting. There have been some very important lessons learned from the past, most notably the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires. So in the fire event we've seen so far, fortunately, we haven't seen any loss of life, although there has been extensive property damage. I think one of the key lessons learned has been the way in which the community prepares and gets ready for these events and is really able to have time to try and evacuate prior to a fire front hitting and being upon them.
Right. Now, as you say, communities need to prepare and have the time, because obviously these bushfires do spread incredibly quickly, so response time is crucial. So what can governments do to help communities prepare, and what have they learnt of the previous incidents you mentioned?
Yeah, some of the clear lessons that have been learned in the past have really been around the messaging to the public in terms of whether they really need to leave early or stay. In previous events such as Black Saturday in Victoria in 2009, the vast majority of people who were killed during that incident actually died on the road trying to leave. So the emergency warnings and the different statuses around that are really critical, and emphasising to people that there is a point in which it is actually too late to leave and you must stay and then hopefully are able to come out of the other side of that fire event without any damage to yourself or property.
Right, and we know that technology is changing the way emergency services now deal with disasters like this. So what major changes have you seen?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So one of the things that the fire services are using extensively now is drone technology, and that really provides the ability to get an aerial view of a fire event, how quickly it's progressing and how it's moving. That's also really helpful in terms of predictive modelling that happens at the same time, and these are really critical in terms of trying to get a really good bird's eye view of the event as it's unfolding and try and evacuate people as quickly as possible. The other issue, of course, is about the messaging around emergency alerts and warnings. And it's been interesting in this event that in the aftermath there have already been a few issues arising around whether residents had sufficient emergency warning sent to them, whether mobile phone coverage and towers actually were able to be effective in that case. And it did ultimately rely a lot on the emergency services going back and conducting door-to-door evacuation warnings.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. Has a statue of the Virgin Mary stopped God-fearing locals in the Philippines from destroying the coral reefs? We hear from the locals. Welcome back. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Goy in Singapore.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm Sharon Jutlail in London. Our top story: China's President Xi Jinping is set to make the closing speech at the annual National Congress.
Hundreds of residents in Australia are told it's not safe to return home after wildfires sweep through a seaside town. Now let's take a look at some front pages from around the world, and we start with the Financial Times, which takes a look at Facebook's very bad day. The company's share fell by over 7% on Monday. That was after allegations of millions of its users being exploited for political gain in the US presidential election. The consultancy denies allegations, though. The Straits Times here in Singapore, meanwhile, says doctors here have been put on notice not to overtreat their patients. Basically, ballooning healthcare and insurance costs are being blamed, partly on doctors who are recommending unnecessary procedures. And finally, on to the China Daily. Maybe the year of the dog, but it seems cats are having the biggest impact. An obsession online has turned into big business, and one celebrity cat called Su Bin has its own cooking show and has more than 4 million followers on Weibo. I think that's more than you and I combined, Sharon Jit. Those are the papers, but what are the stories sparking discussions online?
Well, Mariko, you and many of our viewers actually might know her best as Miranda from Sex in the City, but the actress Cynthia Nixon could one day have a bigger starring role in The Big Apple. She's announced her candidacy for governor of New York. Now, her first hurdle is the Democratic primary, where she'll be up against Andrew Cuomo for the nomination. And she made the announcement on Twitter, and that's generated a lot of conversation there.
Now, former President Barack Obama is in Singapore on a week-long trip to the region, and on Monday he met with a small group of emerging leaders from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN countries, to hear about the work they're doing in their communities and how his charity, the Obama Foundation, can support them. Well, Virya Vichit-Vadakan is one of them, and I spoke to her a short time ago and started by asking how the meeting came about.
We were nominated, and then I got a call from DC just asking about my experience and if I would be interested to, have a youth voice in talking about how the Obama Foundation could serve individuals making impact, in the ASEAN region. And, I said yes without a doubt. I was really excited to share my perspective and being heard. Yeah. And how did the meeting go? Yeah, so the meeting was incredibly inspirational. I came out, being so fired up to do more. What was incredible about it is we all got the opportunity to share our work, be listened to, and just talk to him very deeply and honestly about what has been difficult being a youth, leading in the social sector, being able to voice our opinions about issues and being sort of viewed credibly. And I think it was really inspiring to hear other stories from the ASEAN countries as well. And we came out of it, very sort of, together really united to do more, not just as a country, but as a region. So it's incredibly inspiring session. It must be amazing to have President Obama listening to you and the openness. It was really surreal, but it was so, I would say, like human and very kind of just normal. And we were kind of starstruck in the beginning, but overall it was an incredible experience to share our thoughts. And tell us exactly what you do before we let you go. Yeah, definitely. So I'm currently the Chief Strategy Officer for Learn Corporation, and our mission is to improve education, quality and equity. We support social enterprises, startups in order to use technology in order to enhance the schools, students and teachers' experiences in the classroom. And what kind of support you hope to get from the Obama Foundation? Yeah, so we were very honest about, I think, some support very clearly about making us sort of credible in our work, highlighting case studies, making it possible to see that youth can lead, and there's many case examples that the Obama Foundation said that it's definitely possible to have quote-unquote more spotlight in what we're doing. I think another incredible thing that we talked about is how can we leverage our network more closely. For example, I'm in Thailand doing education. There could be other organizations or youth leaders that are working similarly. So a better way for us to share best practices, connect to mentors, and just deeply have the tools to become more effective leaders.
That was Virya Vichitradekan speaking earlier to Mariko. Now, 8 years ago, a statue of the Virgin Mary was sunk off the coast of Bohol in the Philippines in an attempt to dissuade the God-fearing community there from dynamite fishing. Now, the illegal practice causes huge damage to coral reefs, an essential ecosystem for fish breeding. Now, a group called the Sea Knights, who helped put the statue in place, have returned to assess its success. Howard Johnson has more.
Dotted across the blue waters of the Pacific Ocean are the 7,000 islands that make up the Philippines. Many of them are hours away from the mainland, and that makes policing them incredibly difficult. Joselito Cabansay knows this only too well. For years he was a dynamite fisherman, an illegal practice that risks life and limb but rewards with lucrative catches.
Normal fishing is like earning a minimum wage salary compared to illegal fishing. That produces a large sum of fish. Fishermen see it as a jackpot income.
In 2010, dynamite fishing was so widespread that the local authorities and a group of faith-inspired divers called the Sea Knights decided to take action. They placed a statue of the Virgin Mary at a site where most of the explosions took place. It was hoped that the God-fearing fishing community would stop illegal activity in the presence of a religious icon. Nearly 10 years on, and the Sea Knights have returned to the statue.
Aside from paying their respects to the Virgin Mary today and laying flowers at her feet, biologists within the group will also be looking to assess the health of the coral down there to see if it's improved since their last visit.
As we descended towards the Virgin Mary, it became clear that the statue's appearance had undergone a dramatic change. It's now entirely covered in coral. After praying, the Sea Knights cleaned the statue, removing barnacles and limpets. Back on the surface, I spoke to the group's marine biologist.
So around the statue, what was the state of the coral like?
They're also growing.
So positive signs today?
Yeah, that's a positive sign.
The local authorities say the Virgin Mary has reduced the number of dynamite fishers from hundreds to just a handful. But with limited resources, it's unlikely that illegal fishing can be totally eradicated. Despite this, the Sea Knights continue their work in the community to raise awareness about marine conservation. They'll be back in September to celebrate the nativity of the Virgin Mary. Howard Johnson, BBC News, Bohol in the Philippines.
Now in Beijing, the Chinese President Xi Jinping is about to deliver the closing speech to the annual meeting of the country's parliament. That's the National People's Congress. That's been running for over 2 weeks. Let's have a listen in.
Elect me, continue to be the President of the People's Republic of China. I would like to thank the deputies and the people of the whole country for your trust. As the President of the People's Republic of China, the mission is it's an honor and it's a huge task. I will, as ever, execute the responsibilities invested me by the Constitution and work to do my best to be a good servant of the people, to receive the supervision of the people, and to live up to the expectations of the deputies and the people of the country. All the staff of the state organizations, however high of their positions, have to remember ours is a People's Republic of China. We have the people's interest at the highest place. And we have to remember to work for the people wholeheartedly and work hard for the people's interest and welfare. Deputies, people are creators of history. People are real heroes. The development of the people's China is vast and have long history of civilization which is created by the Chinese people. And this spirit is cultured by the people. The People's Republic of China have undergone through the standing up, moving forward, and to be stronger. And this is the whole process of our strife. The characteristics of the Chinese people not only determine the Chinese civilization for centuries, it also determines the progress and development of the contemporary China to reflect the spiritual worldview. And in the long history, the Chinese people have made great contribution to the development of the country and to the development of the civilization. The Chinese people is a nation with great creativity. In its long history, the Chinese people have worked hard to be creative. We have in the history Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, Confucius, Mencius, Mo Tzu, Sun Tzu, Han Feizhi, these well-known thinkers. We have invented paper making, gunpowder, compost, which impacted on the development of the mankind. We have created poetry, Tang poetry, Song poetry in over different dynasties. We have created moving epochs and have built the Great Wall of China, the Great Canal, Forbidden City, and the Budala City Palace. Today, this creative spirit of the Chinese people is released once again to push forward our development at the head of the world. I believe as long as people of 1.3 billion can work in this spirit, we will create endless miracles. The Chinese people are hard-working people. Over the centuries, the Chinese people have strived and developed and created our country and developed our ocean coasts and agriculture pure products, and have worked on these thousands of rivers and have built numerous towns and villages and created comprehensive industries. The Chinese people have realized there is no free lunch. To enjoy your life, you have to work hard. With the current situation, we can see it's the result of the people's sacrifice and strife and hard work. I believe as long as 1.3 billion people uphold the spirit of strife, we will achieve our game to create better life for our people. The Chinese people are united. Over the history of decades, the Chinese people always united, work together. We established a country of different nationalities. We have a system with 56 nationalities had formed a big family for the Chinese people, especially in recent modern China. With hardship, our peoples have worked together shoulder to shoulder, defeated aggressors, and defended our integrity and independence. We have written a brilliant chapter, an epoch of defending our country. The achievement we have made so far are the result of our working together. The Chinese people have realized through our own experience that unite is strength. Unite can make us forward. a divided country cannot develop. I believe as long as 1.3 billion Chinese people uphold this united spirit, we will form a force which is invisible. The Chinese people have great dreams. Over the centuries, the Chinese people held their dreams and pursued their dreams. We formed our well-to-do life concept, and we have the whole world in our mind. From the ancient history, we worked, we had an outward outlook. And ancient times, our legend and stories have reflected our dreams of working outward. The Chinese people believes we can climb the high mountains and walk a long way and to achieve our goal. Since the modern era, rejuvenate our country has become a dream of our Chinese people. We are resolute and persistent, and we have the spirit to fight to the end against our enemies. We have the strength and the belief to stand among nations in the world, and we have struggled for more than 170 years. And today, the Chinese people are more than ever confident and have belief in our rejuvenation. I believe as long as our people uphold our dream, and we will achieve our dream and the rejuvenation of our nation. Comrades, with the great people, with the great nations, with the great national spirit, we are proud to be confident in our system, in our road, in our system and culture, which also encourages us to go forward. Ours is a country under the leadership of the working class and the people, and with the democratic people's dictatorship. All the power belongs to the people. We must uphold the people's standing, uphold the people's positions, and listen to people's wisdom, and taking the people's views as the criteria of whatever we do. to tackle the issues which are directly related to people's concern and interests, so that our people and our future generations will enjoy a happy life and glory. Deputies, when people are confident, a country has a future and the country is powerful. China's socialism has entered into a new era. The diligent and hard-working Chinese people are more confident, self-respect, and self-believing. The ancient Great Eastern Chinese nation has a bright future. Our theory, our system, our culture is full of life. We are confident about our future. History has and will continue to prove that only socialism can save China. Only the socialist system with Chinese characters will help us to rejuvenate our nation. The world is changing. The development of our country is at a critical stage. We have good environment and conditions for development, but we also face challenges and difficulties. The 19th People's CPC Congress have described a blueprint for building a well-to-do society and the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. To turn the blueprint into a reality is a new battle. There is a long way to go. Time waits for no one. We cannot be complacent and lay back.
Now, we've been listening to the closing speech from President Xi Jinping at the annual sitting of China's rubber-stamped parliament, the National People's Congress. Now, this one, of course, has been marked historically by the presidential term limits being lifted, making President Xi president as long as he likes. Now, he opened the National People's Congress just over 2 weeks ago with a speech that stressed that socialism with Chinese characteristics has entered a new era. Well, he said today that only socialism is the way ahead for China and that the development of their country is at a critical stage. He says it's crucial for the Chinese government to work for the people, and he called the people the real heroes and that they hold all the power. We'll have lots more on this coming up, and we've got sports next.